IC3 faculty, Bryan Ford, professor at EPFL, head of the Decentralized and Distributed Systems Lab. Please, Bryan.
Yeah, thank you, Itai. And thanks a lot. Good to see you all. So I decided somewhat last minute, sorry, to talk about some still in progress work, but rapidly advancing that I hope you'll find interesting. Let me try to share my screen. Get this going. So yeah, so can you see the correct regular view, not the presenter's view of the slides?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I would like to talk about voting in general, but and also in the decentralized systems context. So voting and coercion resistance. So let me just jump in. So I'll first talk about our goals. Why are we working on this? And the basics. What are the known approaches to coercion resistance? And then we'll really focus in on a particular part of the process, which is the sign up or registration. And I'll explain why we're focusing on that context, but I'll set the stage in either more traditional government style elections or in governance for decentralized systems, blockchains, say. And then we'll get into looking at, well, how does this actually work, both from the user's experience and how does it work technically to achieve what we're trying to do. So let's first talk about the basic goal. One thing I think many of us would like is some notion of decentralized digital democracy. How can we build decentralized systems in which communities can self-govern online? Not just self-govern in any way, though, but in some kind of egalitarian, arguably democratic fashion, right? And to emphasize, there are two basic foundations in which we could govern decentralized systems. One is basically wealth or investment centric, where $1 means one vote. The more dollars you have, more you have to invest, the more votes you get, right? And then there's the person-centric approach, which is at the heart of most democratic approaches, where the idea is there should be one person, one vote, right? And of course, we have a lot of different mechanisms, both in the regular world and in distributed systems to deal with these. There are a lot of precedents in both categories, especially in the decentralized systems work, tradition, mechanisms like proof of stake, proof of work, proof of X for most values of X represent different types of investment. Such that, the more you buy, the more you invest in whatever it is, the more votes, the more mining power, the more, stake you get, right? So there's lots of ways to do that. Those are hard, interesting technical challenges, but, it's mostly solved basic ways to do that. We know how to achieve that, but do we even know how to achieve person-centric decentralization? And that, of course, is much less solved at any rate. So, of course, I and my group are interested in a lot of aspects of this problem. If you're interested in our broader picture, here are a few pointers to other aspects of this. Exploring questions like, well, what decentralized architecture in the first place do we need to attack this problem? How do we get Sybil resistance in a one per person basis? How do we, if we do that, how do we get reasonable deliberation and voting structures and so on? But those are big, complicated issues that I'm not going to focus on in this talk. Instead, I want to focus on how do we ensure people have freedom from coercion or vote buying in these kinds of structures, right? So let's focus on this particular problem in the big picture, right? So how do we know people vote their true intent if we can't secure the environment they vote in. Somebody could be looking over their shoulder. Somebody could have coerced them at gunpoint or just paid them to install malware or use the attacker's own device to cast their vote, or many different things can happen, right? And in the past few years, especially with postal voting kind of necessarily becoming a lot bigger, this has been become a bigger, more recognized problem in the real world, in part because postal voting, it's not just e-voting, but postal voting is extremely susceptible to this problem, right? Basically anything but traditional in-person voting has this problem, right? And of course, blockchain systems, especially approaches to blockchain voting and blockchain governance have this problem, as a great paper by some of the other IC3 members really illustrated well a few years ago. So highly recommend that. So that's the overall problem. Now I want to jump into the question, well, what do we know about ways to address coercion resistance, right? Now, of course, this is a problem that's fairly well studied already. There are a number of interesting general approaches. I'll highlight two. One, the first, which Estonia is actually deploying and using on a regular basis, which is you can vote multiple times, and if you're under coercion, let's say you cast a vote under the coercer's surveillance, you can later go back and change your vote secretly. So hopefully you can, if you have time, and if you're not under surveillance close to the deadline, right? And so that time sensitivity is one of the big limitations of the revoting approach. Now, there's this other, whole class of approaches we might call the fake credentials approach that Ari Jules and his colleagues proposed a while ago, and there's quite a few variants of this scheme. So it's a very interesting idea in which you arrange that voters can get both real and fake voting credentials, right? So both real and fake credentials will appear to work, and you'll be able to vote with them, but the fake credentials don't actually count. The votes cast with fake credentials won't actually count, right? And the idea, of course, is only the true voter should actually know the difference between, which is real and which is fake. And anybody, any coercer shouldn't be able to tell the difference. And even the coerced voter, the voter can't be coerced to prove, which is real and which is fake, because that would break the coercion resistance, right? So the voter should know but be unable to prove which credential is real and which is fake. So very interesting idea, right? And of course, if somebody's trying to buy your vote, just sell them fake credentials. You'll make some free money, and you'll still get to vote your conscience, right? So great idea. Can we make it work, right? Now, of course, there are a bunch of challenges to making it work. And in this talk, we're going to focus on the first one, and namely, how do voters actually securely get their both real and fake credentials? And there's a lot of both security and usability issues with this, which we'll get to. There are other challenges worthy of note, such as efficiency, scalability, DOS type attacks, but those are interesting too, but I'm not going to focus on those now. So let's focus on this sign up or registration problem. So in most theoretical work in this space, there's basically an assumption, right, that at some point early in the process, each voter somehow gets both real and fake credentials from the election authority over, something that's usually called an untappable channel, a perfectly private, channel that the adversary can't sniff and can't disrupt, right? Now, but of course, this is where the assumption is something very magical and mysterious happens, because where do you actually get an untappable channel in the real world, right? And so it's often acknowledged that, well, maybe the only maybe the only plausible way to actually implement that untappable channel is for the person to be interacting directly in person in some kind of secure location with the election official, right? So so let's there might be other ways to get an untappable channel, but let's go with that for now. So here's the next problem. Well, we're a decentralized crowd. We don't really want to completely trust any single authority, especially not a single election authority that's going to just be trusted to give all all the correct credentials to all the users and correctly tell them which is their real and which is their fake credentials, etc. Right? So of course, we want to, at the very least, split this trust, at least, split the election authority into several less trusted parties. And actually, cryptography can do this. There's a lot of, well-known ways to split trust in cryptography, and that, in principle works. That's great. So, we know how to do this with cryptography. Except there's kind of this problem, right? Because of that assumption of the untappable channel, which in practice we really only can fill with an in-person interaction, right? What does this mean in reality? Well, in reality, this sounds like it means an ordinary, unsophisticated voter who presumably shouldn't have to know how all this works actually has to show up in person to a veritable firing squad of election officials, talk to them all, and perform some kind of elaborate cryptographic dance, to collect different portions of their real and fake credentials, and then go use them, right? So this this sounds like kind of a problem, right? Of course, we're not the first to look at this problem. There's been other work looking at the usability challenges and how to solve them. One thread of note is, well, if you just assume that all of the users have some kind of trusted hardware, such as a smart card that can perform these cryptographic dances on behalf of the user, then you can get things to work. The problem is, well, first of all, issuing all of those trusted smart cards to all the users costs something, but maybe more importantly, well, we have to trust all that hardware. And do we really, especially for critical elections, and given the imperfect reputation trusted hardware has had for being perfectly secure and reliable all the time, do we really want to trust the entire weight of important high stakes elections to one or a few vendors' trusted hardware and hope nobody ever manages to hack them, right? So this is really what Votegral is kind of trying to address. Can we make coercion-resistant e-voting in this style? Can we make it usable without expecting users to manually perform some kind of elaborate cryptographic dances with multiple election authorities? And can we make it secure with no single points of compromise? No need to trust a single election authority or a single device or any particular trusted hardware, right? So that's what we're trying to do. Now, even though we're looking at the whole system, what we really want to focus on is the sign up or registration part. And I'll first look at I'll try to set the study both in two different usage scenarios. First of all, say you wanted to use this in standard governmental deployment for public elections, right? So we could potentially conceive of that. But how might we? I'll also look at, well, how might we deploy this in a truly decentralized bottom-up system, such as a blockchain or cryptocurrency based on proof of personhood. So I'll get to that in a minute. Okay. So now the main difference is merely when this sign up process happens, and I'll keep it an in-person process. I don't know how to do it if there's no in-person element, right? So let's take a look at how this might work in standard government elections. So So, in order to register to vote, or at least register for e-voting, in this case, you would once every few years, depending on policy, need to go in person to some government office to get your real and fake credentials, and install them on whatever devices you choose, and then you can vote several times in elections in the meantime. Right. And so occasionally you have to go back in person and renew them, but it's, let's say, an amortizable cost. Right. Of course, if you're an expat living in another country, you might need an option to go to an embassy or consulate. There's a bunch of complications that we're not getting into, but let's assume for now that this is a reasonable an implementable model, right? Now, and there can be variants depending on whether the coercion threat is deemed to be lower, in which case, maybe you just go to a nice person and they hand you your credentials and you leave. Or maybe it's in a more high coercion threat environment. You check in, you go into a privacy booth, kind of as if you were going in a privacy booth to vote. But in this case, you're going into the privacy booth just to get your credentials, where nobody can observe, even the election officials. And then you go out and check out and you go on your way, right? So that's the basic workflow we're starting with. And then once you get your credentials, you can cast them on any personal device. You can use one device to check how you voted on other devices. You can have an actual voting record. And you can verify that your vote was cast correctly. I won't get into the details of that, but that's the basic idea, right? So of course there's a key question. Well, is in-person sign up an acceptable cost? That's an open question. Like I said, it's potentially an amortizable cost. It can let you vote several times in multiple elections. And it has various other benefits, potential benefits I won't get into. But let's now, switch to the potential non-governmental use case. What if we wanted to have truly decentralized bottom-up governance in a blockchain or cryptocurrency system, right? So a few years ago, my group proposed the idea of proof of personhood as a basis for blockchain systems. We're still working on prototyping blockchain systems with this based on this concept, and that's of course still in progress as well. I've talked some about this in other IC3 events. But let's again focus back on the coercion resistance problem. Let's suppose we build a system like this, in which mining or voting and other power is distributed evenly in each epoch for some definition of epoch to all the people who show up in person to something like a pseudonym party, as we proposed, right? Can we ensure that these people aren't just minions paid by a rich whale or something to show up and push their agenda? Can we ensure that all the people who show up at least have the opportunity to vote their own free will, their own conscience, independent of anybody who might have paid them to be there or coerced them to be there, right? So I'm not going to talk a lot about pseudonym parties. I'm just going to give you the very basic context, which is, well, there's a deadline, at each epoch. It might be once a quarter, once a month, once a year. I don't know. But if you want to participate, you have to be in in a particular closable space by the deadline. And because you have only one body, real people have only one body each, you can't be in, multiple spaces at once, right? And when the deadline occurs, people start filing out. They basically get one token each, and then they go into a privacy booth to get real and fake credentials based on their participation. And when you leave, you can't get back in. So you can, by virtue of having only one body each, you only get one token, right? Now, of course, there are scalability questions and lots of other questions. These can scale out by having many concurrent parties in different locations, et cetera, but that's not what I'm going to talk about here. So So what is Votegral's contribution here? Well, the contribution is whether we're trying to sign up for voting in person for governmental elections or say in decentralized pseudonym parties, where let's take it as a given that some kind of in person is going to be a cost to get this coercion resistance. But what the person is doing is basically learning at that point of privacy, at that point of freedom from surveillance and coercion, hopefully, that deciding, getting multiple credentials and learning which one is the real one without later being able to prove it to anyone. Okay, so let's now look at what this looks like to users in that privacy booth. Right. So I have a demo video. There's a link there that anyone who wants to look at later. It's password protected, but there's the password. But I won't. I'll just skip that now and just basically briefly outline what the process is. So you go into the privacy booth. There's a kiosk, some envelopes, and some pencils. Right. You go in with your check-in ticket that you got from the election official or from the pseudonym party organizer. You insert it into a little device, into the kiosk, scan it to, which basically enables the kiosk to start helping you produce your credentials, right? So the kiosk is basically going to be a credential printer, right? So first, the kiosk is going to produce your real credential. Your real credential is always produced first, and it's going to first print a QR code, print the first half of a receipt. Then it's going to ask you to pick a random envelope. The envelopes all have QR codes on them as well, and it's going to ask you to scan the QR code on the envelope, and then it's going to print the rest of the receipt. Now you take the receipt that the kiosk printed and you insert it in the envelope so that both QR codes from the receipt and the QR code from the envelope are all basically visible, right? So we'll come back to what this means later. It's for now, just take it as kind of a mysterious dance, right? But hopefully something users can follow. Now, the kiosk asks if the user wants any test credentials. If so, the voter, will first ask the user to mark the real credential to remember which is which, because they're going to be otherwise indistinguishable. Then the user asks the kiosk asks the user to pick an envelope, scan that envelope, and then prints the whole receipt at once. And there's the key difference, right? And then otherwise the user is going to do the same thing, insert the receipt in the envelope and take it away. That combination is the user's fake credential. The user can produce more fake credentials if they want to sell some more or whatever, right? Now later, the user takes these credential homes, scans them on their devices and votes with them. And I won't get into how all that works since I see I'm already running out of time, of course. Now I'm not going to get deep into all the technical details of how this works. I just want to give you a basic sense for what's the key intuition of what's actually going on here, right? So what's actually going on is either at the government-based signup or at the pseudonym party, the organizers are building a bulletin board and putting for each user, each either named user or anonymous user registered at the pseudonym party, the organizers are building a public list of encrypted real credential or encrypted identifiers for real only for the real credentials, right? So an encryption of the real credential is embedded, is part of all of those receipts that I mentioned, both the real and fake ones. Both the real and fake ones have encryptions of the real credentials, and those get put on the public bulletin board, but nobody knows which are real and which are fake from that because they're encrypted, right? Encrypted to an aggregate public key of the multiple election authority roles. So nobody knows it, right? But then what the user can do with any credential is post a claim. There's basically a single, each credential basically acts as a spend once token that can be used once to claim that credential and associate it with a particular device or public-private key pair for voting, right? And that and any votes that's cast with a given credential also goes on the blockchain, right? So, and this is for both real and fake votes. They all go on the blockchain. Anybody can see that they exist. Anybody can verify them. The only thing that's a little bit more subtle is which are real and which are fake, right? And so, without getting into the detail, what's actually going on? I'm gonna skip this. What the average user is definitely not going to know, is not going to be expected to know, but which a cryptographer will know, is that the real credentials are basically honest, interactive zero-knowledge proofs. They're honest in that they were the first QR code is a commit in a Sigma protocol. The second QR code is a challenge. Basically a random number that the user picked by virtue of choosing an envelope. The third QR code that was the last QR code printed on the receipt is the response in this interactive zero-knowledge proof, right? Now, so this will have to be an honest zero-knowledge proof if it was produced in the correct order, 1, 2, 3. Right? But in the process I mentioned of actually printing fake credentials, you notice that the user picked the envelope first, and allowed the device to scan the envelope. And so the kiosk actually knew the challenge before it had to choose the commit or response, right? And so if you're familiar with Sigma protocols, you know that this makes doing things in this wrong order makes proofs trivially forgeable, right? So fake credentials basically have forged zero-knowledge proofs that without proving that they're real credentials, right? And of course, because they're interactive, only the voter observed in the privacy booth which order this thing was printed with. They don't need to know about zero-knowledge proofs. They only need to observe whether they were printed in the two-step process or the one-step process, right? And at least hopefully some of the voters, not all, but at least some will pay attention and understand, when the kiosk tells them this is important for security to notice the difference, right? So I'll skip, the other details I had. The most important point of this is the kiosk and all these other devices are very untrusted. In fact, the kiosk does not need to be trusted for anything in terms of integrity or privacy. For any user who's not under coercion, who has at least one trustworthy device and is paying attention, kiosks are completely untrusted, right? Oh, it's only a voter under coercion that needs to trust the particular kiosk that they end up going to, right? So there's that one still sliver of trust in a particular device required. So anyway, this is, like I said, this is ongoing work. It's already prototyped and we're pretty excited about it, but there's, still a lot left to do. So in conclusion, this process is a proposed way of getting coercion resistance, potentially in either governmental or decentralized systems. In which voters get both real and fake credentials. They learn which is which only interactively in private. And then they can use those for subsequent elections, online deliberations, using them, as stake in one stake unit per person cryptocurrencies and blockchains, etc. Right? Finally, the final message is I feel like we can make coercion resistance secure and even hopefully usable, even if a little clunky. And so, we'd be very glad to hear your comments and ideas. Also, I didn't have time to add, so please let us know if you might be interested in participating in future demos or usability studies, which we're planning to do. So with that, I'll end, and I don't know if there's any time for questions, but if so, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian. We're basically out of time, so maybe I haven't seen anything on the chat, so maybe I'll ask just one quick question. What do you see as the main hurdles next to make this kind of system actually practical in any scenario?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think usability is everything. We think this is usable, despite its, it has some obviously clunky edges, and we have to kind of see if those edges can be filed off enough, if we can make sure that it's usable, even if it doesn't need to be, understandable, in depth by end users, right? And of course, there's the big question, well, is there an easier, more usable way of accomplishing the same thing? There very well could be, but we haven't seen it yet. No.
Okay. Thank you very much. I had a brief cut off there. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much, Brian.